I hate the word innovation. Other words I'm so exhausted of: transformation, breakthrough, radical disruption. Like sometimes literally I'll get a thing that says, please, you're invited to the Radical Transformative Disruption Innovation Conference. That's patient-centered. Oh my goodness. I've been using the words future-proofing, reinventing, and even just modernizing. I mean, people can relate to modernizing.
That's future strategist Zayna Khayat. In the healthcare space today, Zayna needs almost no introduction. She somehow manages to be everywhere at once, from keynoting conferences, speaking at town halls, to talking about the future with healthcare leaders. Zayna is a force. I'm Ellen Gardner, and today my producer, Philip D'Souza, and I sit down with Zayna to hear about the future-proofing of healthcare and where she gets her inspiration. We could not have asked for a better interview as we step into the new year and the start of a new decade.
Imagine you could step inside the minds of Canada's healthcare leaders, glimpse their greatest fears, strongest drivers, and what makes them tick. Welcome to Healthcare Changemakers, a podcast where we talk to those leaders about the joys and challenges of driving change in our complex and demanding healthcare organizations.
So at an early age, you decided that you wanted to tackle the big challenges in the world, and you ended up in healthcare. What was it that drew you, as you say, to the wicked problems on steroids? What was it that motivated you to try and tackle those problems?
So, I mean, I'd say at an early age, in hindsight, I didn't know that at the time. I just think if I look back at the kinds of things I was attracted to since I was a child, that would get my attention. It tends to be this pattern. So I'd probably say where it got, formalized was my first real job. So I did graduate school after undergrad, so I never really had to have a real job until finishing grad school. And my first real job was this firm called BCG, or Boston Consulting Group, where really they train you how to think about really complex problems in a structured way. And then I've just migrated from complex problems, which at the end of the day, you can solve them. It just needs some brains and horsepower, to what I call wicked problems, which are these intractable problems that you can't solve them until you start solving them. And that's when I got gravitated to healthcare and its messiness. But I was reflecting that when I was at BCG, at some point I helped build our climate change and sustainability practice. So helping big organizations around the world plan for this world. And I was drawn to that. So at one point I had to decide, do I go the climate change route or do I go to healthcare, which was much more comfortable because my doctorate was in cell biology. So it just shows, I just love solving messy problems that are important to society. And that's how I ended up where I am.
When you were at BCG, because I know BCG is a very well-respected big company, and it sounds like you were in there very young and tackling some big, complex problems. Did you learn a lot from that experience of working in that kind of difficult and complex environment?
So working at that firm was the game changer for not just my career, but I'd say my life. So to get put in that environment where you're learning, it's not just methods to unpack and solve really, really complex problems, but you learn communication, you learn relationships, you learn time management. I got my wizard skills of PowerPoint and Excel, and you get it all very quickly, in a condensed time. So if that didn't happen, if I didn't get that job, I don't even know what I'd be doing right now, to be honest.
What were some lessons that you learned from your parents, Zayna?
So just some context on my parents. I'm kind of probably a typical Canadian. Parents are from Lebanon, immigrated in the early 70s when Pierre Trudeau, so the father of our current prime minister, opened up immigration. My mother has maybe a grade 5 education. She married very young. My father has no education. He was a mechanic. So just the Canadian story, right? Coming here with really nothing, couldn't speak the language, and struggling to lay down their roots. So I'm the product of that generation, like many. And so, if I reflect on, I wouldn't have had it any other way. So things like, absolutely like hard work, but never complaining that it's hard. That's just how life is, from my dad. And I'd say my mom as a homemaker. Selflessness, absolutely. And that then leads to humility. And I think part of why I've been able to tread my path in my career is, and I'm from a town, Windsor, Ontario, where we got an edge in our town, right? Nobody thinks they're better than anybody in that town. And when you're a child of immigrants, you really don't. And that kind of humility and kind of authenticity, I think is really important when you're trying to solve really hard problems that matter to the world, because there's just no ego, no power, just put your head down and get it done, and a lot of real talk. And I find that authentic for me, and I find people tell me that they find it refreshing and a bit easy to kind of get on with things.
How does a person develop confidence in their vision, or confidence in the fact that I'm a little bit different, or I'm going to follow my own path?
People won't believe it, but I was this shy, quiet, immigrant girl, right? In even grade 9 and grade 10 and even grade 11, if I look back, I was off the grid, really shy. And then just randomly out of nowhere, I remember I just decided to not just run for student council, which I had never joined before. I ran to be the president of my high school. Who does that? But I just did. I don't know. And then I just never looked back in terms of, interpersonal speaking, motivating, having energy, and just my whole personality exploded after that, right? So, and I don't know that I could have gone that path if I grew up where there's a lot more competition for power.
You've had some impressive positions around the world. I'm thinking about working at Radboud University in the Netherlands. Your title there was Innovation Sherpa. At that time, you developed a healthcare innovation school, also in the Netherlands. And now at Rotman, you are teaching healthcare innovation. So I wonder about, I'm thinking about the process of how do you train people to think innovatively?
I literally just left a working session at the Ministry of Health today where that was, we all ended up retreating to that question. At the end of the day, and I say this every time I'm asked, the reason we are stuck in terms of, not having an experience of healthcare and a healthcare system that matches anybody's needs, wants, or expectations, at the level that they need, want, and expect it, whether you're a patient, a caregiver, or a clinician, or anybody. It's all mindset. It's all mindset. Yes, there's 1,000 other barriers, but the first one is mindset and how you think. And so that was really what my mission was when I got recruited on secondment to the Netherlands to build this health innovation school. The innovation school, and that was for the entire health system of 17 million people. It was not around, the craft of doing innovation. How do you take a problem? How do you design a thing? No, that was you can learn that online. You don't need Zayna, but it was about mindsets. That's what the school was. It was a mindset changing school. And to have every copy of everybody in the system in the room for that course. This was not, here's the doctors, go teach them. And we had patients, we had nurses, we had tech companies, administrators, government, insurer, you name it, big companies, little. So that's at the end of it, what to me is where I focus. So what's that about? Well, at the end of the day, this stuff, it can be learned too. You just need to practice some muscles to learn how to think, in these new ways. Integrative thinking, exponential thinking, a bit of this kind of blue ocean. You don't get a lot of practice doing that in healthcare. If anything, systems have been designed to obliterate that thinking. And so it's just not easy to let it come out. And that's what I try to focus on in all of my, I call it just capacity building work, whether that's the course I teach at the university, the talks I give, like I give a lot of keynotes and speeches. It's when people tell me like you blew my mind, it means something changed in their brain. That's my job. That's what it means to do, innovative thinking.
How does that apply then to healthcare leaders? How can they tap into that thinking in a more regular way?
Yeah, I'd say, they can and they are, right? If I look at who's kind of, where the activity is, what I'm getting called to be, what I'm seeing, everybody is trying to, train themselves as leaders and then enable their workforce to shift their mindsets. So it is happening. If leaders, know that they need to be thinking differently, a lot are taking it upon themselves. Others are just being around people who think this way, and it does rub off by osmosis. And then others take it the whole next level. So for example, at the Rotman Business School, we just started the first ever global healthcare MBA. And remember, Rotman's positioning as a business school to differentiate it is about integrative thinking. How do they breed and train the next generation of management leaders to think integratively, not linearly and top down? So anyway, so this one's a global one, right? So we got 30 or 35 learners from around the world, and we take them out to Singapore and to London, UK, and so you can go that next level and really learn how to work and think this way through Singularity University and other things. So lots of ways to participate.
It's exciting when you think about it that what you say is like a mind explosion. Suddenly some people start to see things in a completely different way. And for some people that process is probably a flick of a switch. And for other people, it's just a slow process. They need time to come around. So for some organizations, when they need that push, how can they get that push to move ahead? Because what you're talking about is we need to grab this thing and get going.
Yeah, so great question. So I'd say, again, what I've seen from a lot of the health organizations that, we've been working with or that call me in is a couple ways. So one is everybody has mechanisms they have of convening their people. Retreat, leadership days, whatever, pick a town hall. So what I'm seeing more and more is they're kind of calling me to come and open that thing up with, 40 minutes or something to really set a tone. I mean, what a keynote does is sets the key for whatever's happening with the orchestra next. So, and I've been finding that's been very effective of like, I'm an outsider, I'm a weirdo. Most of the time it's been hospitals calling me because they are where most of the resources are in healthcare. So I'm not of them. So, they'll kind of accept these freaky ideas, So that's a lot of the starting point. And I just did one this week in Ottawa where they're kicking off a town hall to kick off kind of a future visioning exercise. And I was brought in to shake things up. The other way is more decentralized, where, and I think you need both, but I love the bottom up, where it's a unit or a department or a team or a project that have found like-minded people and they're just gonna work their way irrespective of where the rest of the org is. and that's kind of, what my team is a little bit here. So those are how it really happens, because you're applying the magic to something real in your world, not, sitting there didactically listening to a keynote speaker. Yeah.
Is there an example of one that you've seen where it's just been exciting to see it take hold?
Oh, I mean, I see them every day, right? Like, where, let's say, a great one I admire is UHN, University Health Network, one of the big academic medical centers here, where I don't know where, the decision was made, if it was push or pull, but to really liberate patient data. So anybody who touches that hospital, will have, unrestricted access to every record that was written about them during that encounter through these things we call patient portals. I've gotten to know the team, that's kind of actually making that happen. And in my opinion, the people on that team, their way of working, their energy, their slides, the way they're on Twitter, it just feels like a very different personality. And then you start to attract the same, to that team, right? So those are the kinds of things I think are a good way to get at this stuff a bit more bottom up. And then hopefully the two top down and bottom up meet each other at some point.
Your title at St. Elizabeth is Future Strategist, which means, as you say, hanging out with the future. What do you think about the pace of change in the Canadian healthcare system right now?
Well, I guess looking backwards, it's been frustrating. Now, on the one hand, you could say there's been a lot of change, but really at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like it for anybody. I think part of why I've been recruited into this role, and let's be clear that this is going to be the next role that every health organization has, is this idea of future proofing, which is the forward-looking rate of change coming is nothing like we've seen before. And humans cannot conceptualize that because we project forward what's been our backward experience. That's human nature. And if your backward experience has been, what I call glacial, pace, then you can't even imagine it going any faster. And we really are at a different time because this kind of digital is coming to our sector, and we're kind of the last sector. Like, even construction got out of this, has emerged to be a digital first business that happens to have physical capital and labor. We are not yet a digital first, operating model. So it's coming, and it's going to come fierce and fast. So, and you layer on that patient and consumer and, a caregiver expectations are changing on an exponential curve, and we're out of money. Like, my God, you have a perfect cocktail of change. So that's what I do. So I'm frustrated, but not really. I understand it. And, my job, I don't predict the future. I'm not a futurist. I'm a future strategist, which means my job is to kind of keep an eye on the future. What are the signals? What are the use cases? What are the examples? What are the positive deviants? And then my team's job is to translate those into actions we're taking right now. That's a very different approach to, let's call it innovation, from most of where Canadian healthcare is today, that are building an innovation team, looking at their strategies, and evolving their current model to the future. We're starting with where the world's going and then working backwards.
Where do you draw your inspiration from?
One is, first and foremost, I do a lot of reading, right? So I'm constantly mining and sensing and looking and observing. I listen to podcasts all the time. When I'm at a conference, I engage in a very different way. Like, I'm not there to consume content because I know the content. I'm looking for signs of different ways of thinking or different behaviors or cool way people present a slide or cool facilitation methodologies. You know what I mean? I'm constantly collecting and refreshing my methods. So that's kind of my ground level inspiration. And then, more in, is the raw material is we're in the field. We're with patients, we're with caregivers, I'm with my staff. And that's where I get my inspiration because I can directly connect the dots between the experiences they're having or lack thereof, what's going on in the world, and how my team is going to try to fill that gap.
Yes, because you had said that one of the reasons why you joined St. Elizabeth was because you wanted to work for an organization that was delivering care to patients.
Yeah.
What are you learning from seeing, how patients and families interact with the healthcare system, and how does that trigger things in your mind that you think, oh, this could be a new important innovation?
Look, my whole career after from my first job at BCG, and if I look back, from 2001 until 2018, that's been my working career, has been as an intermediary, consultant, academic, agency, always the middle person between the supply of innovation and its adoption at scale, right? So And so when you're doing that, you have very sterile, academic, pretty conceptual, frameworky, very logical views of why this isn't working and how it can work. Then you get in the real world. And wow, is that sobering. So I think it's just brought a ton of reality. And it takes away the rosy glasses of, oh, this tech can do this and this can do, like, you know, at the end of the day, what has never changed in healthcare is people just want to be cared for, you know, and so it eliminates a ton of noise. Whereas when I was an outsider looking in, I would have thought, oh, St. Elizabeth should do this, St. Elizabeth should do that. And now I'm like, no, we don't need to do that. No, we just need to do that. You know, so it's great, right? And then it just keeps us very real. And what I love about home care, and I just tweeted about this yesterday, is, you know, it's a raw native environment. We are guests into people's homes. It's their lives, and we're a little drop in their life. Right? And it might go up and down, how the drop, but that's very different from when you're asking them to come to your turf, your clinic, your hospital, your rules, your processes, your ways of working. They're guests in your world. And the world of healthcare is moving to be, you know, people driven. So it's just been a blessing and an honor to be immersed in that environment, let alone with, you know, the largest agency in this space in Canada, you know, with, I think we do like 20,000 care exchanges a day. It's a pretty fun laboratory to be working in.
What is St. Elizabeth Health doing right now to help seniors live their best lives at home?
Our society is aging, and we need to be on top of and ahead of what this population needs, wants, and expects. So we're recasting. Practically what that means is, I'd say there's kind of three big areas we're working in. Redefining the future. One is the whole experience of home care, the way it's done today. We've got 3 or 4 ways we're kind of turning it on its head and testing with new models and evaluating and then hopefully scaling. The second is a lot of, you know, amazing new partnerships with hospitals, kind of pre-acute and post-acute. So before you ever show up, and then when you leave, you know, getting you out of there faster, continuing the hospital care into the home setting, so what I call the homespital. We have this thing in Ontario, these they're called ALC, alternative level of care. So a lot of largely aging adults are occupying a hospital bed that don't need a hospital, but they have nowhere else to go to get the support. So we have a bunch of projects now to literally handhold, bring them home and reactivate them at home. And so all these kind of transitions, let's call them, is the second big area. And the third area we've just started to work on is housing, affordable housing that has healthcare built in for seniors. And so that's kind of a bit new, but we're just starting to get into that space now as well.
Our whole society has moved towards digital, and yet healthcare is one of the few holdouts where most of our interactions are still face-to-face. What is it going to take, Zayna, for healthcare to adjust its thinking to the digital world? And should we be going in that direction?
It's not one is better. It's that we should be matching the ways we communicate in every other part of our life with the tools. Guess what? We already know how to use every day. Text, email, phone, and now Skype, voice. But instead, we're saying, no, it doesn't count other than if you're in person in the same time and place. And the only tools that count are the ones we decided, because we encoded them in law, called the fax machine, the pager, CD-ROMs, like really, you know, written prescriptions. That's what I'm frustrated by, right? And I actually think bad care is happening when we decide that the only thing that counts is an in-person visit. And that's what I'm trying to kind of beat into people. And that's not just with doctor visits, that's home care too. The only thing that counts in government-funded home care is when the nurse or the OT or the PSW crosses your door front. And I'm sorry, that's important, but that's not the only thing, right? Why can't they text you when you're worried at 2:00 in the morning that something's going wrong? So that's what I'm trying to, get. And like, again, the problem with this is it's already like that all over the world. Like, are mammals different in Canada? I don't know. I think we're turning a corner. And the beauty of these tools is the business case is a slam dunk. You're actually not adding thing that's going to add cost. You're actually going to free up a ton of capacity in the system so that, if you do have freed up clinician time, they can focus on the patients who really need the in-person and not have to use, a visit, for something that could have been done in a text.
Do patients have to demand more?
100%. That's my number one advice. I think the tipping point for Canadian healthcare to modernize and find these, efficiencies we're going to get from just taking the friction out of all the communication that happens. All healthcare is communication. Is when everyday Canadian citizens demand more, and that drives choices about resources or policies or whatever. And we're not enraged yet. There's a patient revolution happening in the rest of the world, I'd say. We're not there yet. We're there in pockets, right? I think children's health has been amazing. Children's mental health in particular. Some palliative are very activated. Some cancer maybe, but that's not the fair share.
I wanted to ask you who you have your eyes on now in terms of the future and the trendsetters that we should be watching.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of where, what do I have my eyes on, what signals, what trends, I probably put them into 3 buckets. So the first is topics, like hot topics that are just a different way to frame and think. So, the future of aging is a big one. Shameless plug right now. We just wrote a book. We've been working on it for a year called The Future of Aging. It's a pretty definitive Bible of all of what we've been learning. Hospital at home, like I mentioned before, all of this shift out of institutions and into the home and community as in terms of business models and care models. The third is democratization of access, particularly to primary care. So really, opening up how people can access, our front door to healthcare, which is primary care, and then all of the innovation around primary care, and reinvention, and then just a couple technology areas that are pretty hot. Of course, artificial intelligence, voice, as the next interface for all of us in everything in our digital lives, not just in healthcare, will be voice. That's the next evolution. So we will be emancipated from screens and keyboards. And then the last couple topics, nurse innovation. So we call this entrepreneurs. We say it's just a spelling error of the word entrepreneurs. Big movement. We're hosting an international conference on nurse innovation in May of next year or April on the 200th birthday of the first entrepreneurs, Florence Nightingale. So we're part of an international movement that we actually launched at the United Nations on nurse innovation. 2020 is the year of the nurse of the UN. And then finally, autonomous transport. I think this is going to be a game changer in healthcare. I think 70% of the activity in healthcare is logistics, moving people, moving bodies, moving supplies, and autonomous transport, whether that's drones or vehicles, I think is going to be a game changer. So that's topics. I'll go faster through the others. I'll just now start to do a big list. The next of what I keep my eye on are just certain organizations. Amazon, Walmart, Apple, Google, Uber, and Lyft. They will be the top medical transportation companies in the world. Best Buy is becoming a healthcare company. Internationally, more younger, up-and-coming organizations like Buurtzorg in the Netherlands, a really reinvention of home care. Care More Health in the U.S., kind of a social determinants meets primary care, meets seniors care in the home. Ping An Good Doctor in China, we got to all keep our eye on. I think they're amazing. Democratizing access to medical care. Babylon Health out of the UK, they've just come to Canada, so a digital first triage for primary care. Seqster, Seqster, they're actually doing what everybody dreams of collecting and connecting all the data about you in a very accessible way without costing billions of dollars and taking 25 years to build. They did it in like a year. And then locally, some of, where I get inspiration are organizations like Care, modernizing home care, Think Research, kind of big AI data company, Health, and then Women's College Hospital. And then I've got a big list of people that I follow, but I won't list them. If you follow my Twitter, I have a list called Health Innovation Gurus. So you can go there and you can find my favorite peeps.
You do a lot of speaking engagements, and there's a lot of buzz right now about healthcare innovation. I'm wondering what's one question that you get asked that does surprise you?
I don't know about surprise. I've never been surprised, but I actually just did a comment about this yesterday that pretty much the same 7 questions get asked every time, and I'm just a little bit exhausted of them because they're at a level of discourse that to me is not where we should be talking. So, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like, what about privacy? Okay, nothing that I just said in my keynote says, oh, we're going to throw privacy out the door. But that gets implied that that's what I said, Of course you do privacy by design. My metaphor is like, if you were building, a new curling iron, the plug you use for the curling iron has to match CSA standards. So it's a given. Now, there's bigger questions about privacy because of, the way who holds your data and how, but that's not what I get asked. I'm like, you're going to, anyway, that's one. The other is around who's going to pay. I'm like, what does that mean, right? So, and it comes from a place of who's going to pay for digital tools. Well, that's the wrong question, right? That, to me, if you're using a digital tool, asking that question to me is like, who's going to pay when your doctor office calls you for the telephone line? Well, that's just what they're doing because it's the right way to communicate. Nobody asks, is it a bell phone? Or there's no evidence. Is a bell telecom? This is just, so that's the wrong question. It's what outcomes are we getting and what combination of people, technology, hardware, software, are you combining to hit the results you want? That's what matters. And then pay for that, So who's going to pay? Other ones, I won't get into the details. All of this, when we enter digital, we're gonna dehumanize healthcare more. No, we're not. The whole point is we're dehumanizing it today because we're having people with heart, passion, and soul and a lot of training do about 40% of their time on administrative things that could be done by a machine. Or we have a one-size-fits-all model that whether it's an 80-year-old with 7 diseases or Zayna with a kid with a sore throat, that 80-year-old and my kid get the same access to a doctor at the same time with the same amount of time. That's wrong. So my message is no, we're going to increase the humanity of healthcare with this. We're not going to decrease it. I also kind of don't like the way I do a lot of my talks because they're still not traditional. Like, Zayna, give a 60-minute keynote, and then we'll have 2 minutes for questions. I'm like, we should be flipping that. Let's have a structure, then let's have a structured dialogue. And every now and then I might bring in content, So I like to I like to see playing around with that. One format I've been dreaming to do is I forget what it's called, but you don't, preset the panel. Like, how many panels am I on where they've done 4 phone calls? He will say this, and then you will answer this, and then they will say this, and you will talk for 46 seconds about, what the hell is it? So the other version is pick a topic, get a couple people on the stage, and keep 2 chairs free, and anyone from the audience can kind of come in and out, and there's no moderator, and it's not controlled. Have a good conversation. So I'm excited about innovation in how we do thought leadership.
In the healthcare world, there is a built-in resistance to big change.
Yeah, sameness is comfortable.
Yes, doing things differently, like the idea of having a panel with 2 empty chairs, calling people up. So what is your advice, Zayna, on how to guide people and convince them there are different ways of doing things?
I don't like to blame and say they're resistant to change, right? I think it's around there's comfort with what you know. And it's just, and there's a massive, I don't even say risk aversion. Everybody loves to say that in healthcare. No, we're not risk averse. We're risk intolerant. We don't try to manage risk. We actually try to exclude risk. And so, at the end of the day, there was a great quote at the Children's Healthcare Conference this week from Alika LaFontaine, the doctor, I think in Alberta, right? That the system we have is the sum of the minimum risk, of the maximum risk that everybody would tolerate. And that's why we have what we have. So the point is, so I don't really see it that way, but it's more of, I think sometimes you just got to throw it out there in a fresh way and show an example. Okay? I'm just going to give you one example. It just happened today. I got invited and selected to be on this, this council, and they called it the Innovation Council, for a group, for a system. And I got there and I looked at the mandate and I was like, respectfully, this isn't innovation, what you've asked us to do. You're using that word, but it doesn't match the task. So I said in the group, let's rebrand this group. It's not going to happen. They looked at me like, hey, but I said it. And you know what? That's already impactful. And I'm just going to give one more example. I did a workshop with a big hospital that brought me in for half a day, did my keynote, then a workshop, because they're about to build a brand new hospital. And that's like a 20-year process, you guys know. And you know that, right? The second you submit your plans for this hospital, it's already obsolete. Like, that's crazy in my opinion. Anyway, so they brought me in, opened their thinking so that when they design this new hospital, it's designed for the future. And in the end, they literally concluded, we have no business building this hospital. What?
That would have upset a lot of people.
Upset, but in a way that they were like,
wow,
we never had time and space to have a real conversation because we're doing what everybody else does. Just get the foundation, go raise money, work your politics. So that's very courageous, and I love it. So I don't poo-poo the way people think. Like, I'm inspired everywhere I go by how people try to shake things up. And I really feel like we're at a tipping point. And I'm going to give credit to you. Like, a podcast like this is a great way to get these ideas out that I think is way more powerful than reading yet another report that says the exact same thing.
Zayna, it's time for the Healthcare Changemakers Lightning Round. We're going to ask you a series of comments and really tell us the first thing that pops into your mind. First thing you do in the morning.
Turn on CBC Radio 1 and then check Twitter.
Last thing before you go to bed.
Check Twitter.
One book on your nightstand.
Oh man, I just bought one, but I can't remember the name. I saw it in the airport. But I've got Harari's Homo Deus and New Power by Henry Timms. Yeah, that's a rocking book.
Your go-to mobile app.
I mean, for work, Twitter. For life, I don't know. I love a bunch of them. Instagram.
One problem you'd solve if you were going to launch a startup tomorrow?
Oh, I like that question. I don't think there's any real problems left that somebody doesn't have a solution for. So when I think of startup, I don't think of a tech company. I'm thinking the problem left to solve is actually a systematic way to efficiently adopt all the amazing solutions at scale. That's the unfinished business.
We know this word gets used a lot, especially in your life. Innovation, maybe we're a bit tired of it. So what is another word for innovation?
I hate the word innovation. Other words I'm so exhausted of: transformation, breakthrough, radical disruption. Like, sometimes literally I'll get a thing that says, please, you're invited to the Radical Transformative Disruption Innovation Conference. That's patient-centered. Oh my goodness. I've been using the words future-proofing, reinventing, and even just modernizing. I mean, people can relate to modernizing.
You spend your days looking into the future. I'm going to ask you what keeps you grounded in the present.
Honestly, it's our clients every day and our nurses and our other staff, their needs, why they wake up every day and do what they do. That keeps me grounded because I know what we're doing is the right work.
Thank you, Zayna, for a fascinating conversation. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Myself as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. You can hear more of our interview on our website, HIROC.com. Follow us on Twitter at HIROC Group or email us at communications@HIROC.com. Healthcare Changemakers is recorded by Ellen Gardner and Philip D'Souza and produced by Podfly Productions for HIROC.com. Please rate us on iTunes.